I've always been fascinated by the thin line between sleep and wakefulness, that mysterious twilight zone where your mind drifts into dreams but your body somehow doesn't keep up. It's in that space that sleep paralysis lives, a phenomenon I once thought was just a strange quirk, but over time, I found out it could be so much darker. Sleep paralysis is that terrifying moment when you wake up but can't move a muscle. Your eyes open, your mind fully aware, yet your body remains frozen, trapped in a limbo between dreaming and reality. It's like being stuck inside your own body, a prisoner unable to scream, shout, or even turn your head. But what makes it truly horrifying isn't just the paralysis itself, it's the visions, the shadows, the chilling sensations that often accompany it. The stories I heard growing up painted it as a nightmarish experience, something that could twist your sense of reality and leave you shaken for days. The first time I really started to understand sleep paralysis wasn't from my own experience, but from the whispers and stories shared by friends. It was back in middle school, around the time when horror movies and ghost stories fascinated me the most. I remember sitting in the school library during lunch break, a group of kids gathered around, exchanging tales that seemed too wild to be true. One friend described waking up unable to move, feeling a heavy weight pressing down on her chest, like an invisible force was trying to suffocate her. Another talked about seeing a shadowy figure standing silently at the foot of his bed, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Their voices lowered as they recounted the fear, the helplessness, how it felt like being caught between two worlds, alive but trapped in a nightmare you can't wake from. Listening to them, I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. It was the kind of fear that sticks with you, not because it's loud or sudden, but because it's so personal and intimate. It wasn't a scary movie or a ghost story, it was something that could happen to anyone, even me. From that day on, sleep paralysis became a sort of dark fascination for me. I started to read more about it, diving into forums where people shared their own chilling encounters. There were stories of people feeling a presence in the room, shadowy shapes lurking just beyond the edge of vision, sometimes watching, sometimes reaching out with invisible hands. Others spoke of hearing whispers, voices so faint but filled with malice, or seeing faces distorted in impossible ways, twisted into expressions of pure terror. The more I read, the more I realized how common these experiences were, yet how deeply they affected each person. Sleep paralysis wasn't just a sleep disorder, it was a portal to some of the darkest corners of the mind, where fear takes shape and reality blurs. I remember one particular story that stuck with me. A girl described waking up during the night, unable to move, and seeing a figure sitting on her chest. She said it was like a living nightmare, the weight pressing down so hard she could barely breathe. The figure was dark and shapeless, but somehow she knew it was watching her, waiting for something. She tried to scream but no sound came out. Hours felt like minutes before the paralysis finally lifted, and she bolted upright, gasping for air. It was terrifying enough to make me sleep with the lights on for days. But what haunted me more was the thought that this experience wasn't just a bad dream. It was real as any moment I'd ever lived, and it could happen to anyone at any time. These stories didn't just scare me, they made me curious. What was happening in our brains during sleep paralysis? Why did our minds conjure these terrifying images? Was it just a trick of the mind, or was there something more sinister lurking in the shadows? I learned that sleep paralysis happens when your brain wakes up before your body does, leaving you conscious but unable to move. It's a natural part of REM sleep, when your muscles are normally paralyzed to prevent you from acting out your dreams. But sometimes, the timing gets out of sync, and you're left trapped in that frozen state. That explained the paralysis, but not the terrifying hallucinations or the feeling of an ominous presence. Scientists call those hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations, dream-like visions that occur on the edge of sleep or waking. But to those experiencing it, the line between dream and reality is razor-thin, and the fear is very real. I also found out that sleep paralysis has been a part of human folklore for centuries, described in stories all over the world. In some cultures, it's called the old hag, a witch or demon that sits on your chest and suffocates you in the night. In others, it's a spirit or ghost trying to communicate, or an evil force trying to claim your soul. These myths gave voice to the terror people felt, trying to explain something so strange and frightening. It made me wonder if maybe there's more to it than just biology, if somehow our minds are tapping into something ancient, something we don't fully understand. As I got older, I started to notice the signs of sleep paralysis creeping closer. The nights when I was overtired or stressed, when my sleep schedule was erratic, I'd wake up feeling that same heaviness, that same sense of being trapped. but I never really experienced the full paralysis, not yet. For me, sleep paralysis was like a shadow looming just out of reach, a darkness waiting for the right moment to pull me under. I was both terrified and fascinated by it, caught between dread and curiosity. I think what makes sleep paralysis so haunting is how it blurs the boundaries of reality. When you're awake and paralyzed, your mind is wide open to the darkness around you. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every shifting shadow becomes a threat. Your brain scrambles to make sense of the paralysis, and it fills the void with images and sensations so vivid they feel real. It's like your worst nightmares come alive, right there in your bedroom. And the worst part is, you know it will end eventually, you just don't know when, and until it does, you're trapped in a waking nightmare. That's what makes sleep paralysis a perfect setting for horror stories. It's deeply personal, terrifyingly real, and impossible to fight. It's the kind of fear that stays with you long after you wake up, coloring your memories and your dreams. And for me, it became the gateway to a series of experiences that would change how I see the world, and myself, in ways I never expected. I don't know if you've ever felt that moment when you wake up and realize you can't move. It's like your body is a prison, and your mind is screaming to be free. If you have, then you know how terrifying it can be. If you haven't, I hope you never do. Because once you've tasted that paralyzing fear, it's hard to forget. It's hard to shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, you're not alone in the darkness after all. Soft ambient music fades in. I never imagined that sleep paralysis would hit me personally until that restless night during my sophomore year of college. It was one of those nights where your mind just won't switch off, and no matter how hard you try, sleep stays just out of reach. I remember tossing and turning in my bed, the clock ticking past 3 a.m., when suddenly I snapped awake, or at least I thought I did. My eyes fluttered open, but something was wrong. My body felt like it was glued to the mattress, completely unresponsive. I tried to move my fingers, then my toes, but nothing. It was as if I was trapped inside my own skin. Panic started to rise when I noticed a weight pressing down on my chest, heavy and unrelenting, making it hard to breathe. I was wide awake, fully aware of everything around me, but utterly powerless. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It wasn't fully formed, more like a dark silhouette, but the shape was unmistakable. It stood there, still and silent, just watching. Every instinct screamed at me to scream back, to wake my roommate, to do anything to break free. But my voice was gone. My body was frozen. The figure seemed to lean forward slightly, its presence thick with something I can only describe as pure dread. It whispered words I couldn't understand, like a language from some place beyond this world, and the sound sent chills down my spine. I wanted to close my eyes, to escape into whatever dream state might offer relief. But I was trapped between worlds, unable to blink away the terror. Minutes felt like hours as I lay there, paralyzed and helpless, until finally, slowly, my limbs began to tingle. Movement returned inch by inch, and with a gasp, I sat up, drenched in cold sweat. My room was just as I left it, empty except for the faint glow of the street lamp outside. No sign of the shadowy figure, as if it had never been there at all. But I knew what I'd seen, and more importantly, I knew what I'd felt, the oppressive weight, the silence, the fear. After that night, I couldn't just brush it off as a bad dream. I dove headfirst into researching sleep paralysis, desperate to understand. I found communities online where people shared stories eerily similar to mine, the weight on the chest, the shadowy visitors, the inability to move or cry out. It was a strange comfort to know I wasn't alone, but it also terrified me to realize how many others had faced these same horrors. Some wrote about benevolent figures, others about malevolent presences that lingered long after the paralysis ended. The experiences varied, but the feeling of helplessness was universal. I learned that sleep paralysis could happen to anyone, often triggered by stress, sleep deprivation, or erratic sleep schedules. It was common among college students pulling all-nighters, which explained my timing perfectly. But the hallucinations, that part was less understood. Scientists believe the brain, in its half-awake state, misfires sensory signals, conjuring images and sounds from the subconscious. But for those caught in the grip of it, the hallucinations are as tangible and terrifying as anything real. I started keeping a journal, writing down every detail I could remember from that night and any subsequent episodes. I wanted to track patterns, triggers, anything that might help me avoid falling back into that frozen nightmare. And as I read more, I realized some people had developed coping strategies, relaxation techniques, focused breathing, even trying to move just a finger or toe to break the paralysis. But none of that helped the lingering fear. One story I read haunted me. A man described waking up to find a dark figure at the foot of his bed, whispering words that made his skin crawl. He tried to scream, tried to move, but was frozen. The figure leaned in and touched his forehead, and in that moment, he saw the face of someone he'd lost years ago. It was like the paralysis had opened a door to memories, to something beyond death. The idea that sleep paralysis might connect us to something supernatural or spiritual wasn't scientific, but it was a thought that stayed with me. That night, after my first real experience, I didn't sleep. I sat up in bed, the light from my phone casting eerie shadows across my room. Every creak of the house sounded amplified, every faint noise a potential threat. I wanted to believe it was just a glitch in the brain, a harmless phenomenon. But the fear was so raw, so visceral, that it felt like something more. In the days that followed, I became obsessed with understanding it. I read every article, watched every documentary, and connected with others online who had been through the same. We shared tips, stories, and a mutual understanding of what it felt like to wake up trapped inside your own body. Some said it was a test of willpower, others believed it was a message from the subconscious. For me, it was a terrifying glimpse into the fragility of the human mind. I also discovered that the feeling of pressure on the chest wasn't just a metaphor. It's one of the hallmark symptoms of sleep paralysis, known as the incubus phenomenon, where people feel a presence pressing down on them. Historically, this was linked to folklore about demons or witches sitting on a sleeper's chest, paralyzing them to feed off their energy or steal their breath. That connection between ancient myth and modern science fascinated me. It was as if our ancestors had tried to explain the same terrifying experience in the only way they knew how. Despite all my research, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The shadowy figure, the whispered words, the choking weight, those images haunted my dreams and my waking hours. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, checking the corners of my room before sleeping. The fear that it might happen again was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I tried to tell my friends, but their reactions ranged from skepticism to dismissive jokes. "You just need to sleep more," one said. "It's all in your head," another joked. But I knew better. Sleep paralysis wasn't a joke. It wasn't just a weird dream. It was a glimpse into something dark and terrifying, a place where consciousness and nightmare collide. So, I kept researching, kept writing, and kept waiting for the next time. Because once you've felt that paralyzing fear, once you've seen the shadow at the foot of your bed, you can never forget. And though I hoped it wouldn't happen again, a small, nagging part of me was already bracing for the return of that silent watcher in the darkness. Music fades out. Low, suspenseful music begins. After that first harrowing night, I thought the worst was behind me. But sleep paralysis doesn't always announce itself with a singular event. Sometimes, it creeps back quietly, arriving uninvited when you least expect it. A few weeks later, during a particularly stressful exam period, it returned, this time with a new, even more terrifying presence. I had been studying late into the night, the exhaustion piling up like a storm cloud over my head. When I finally collapsed into bed, I was ready to escape into sleep and forget the chaos of the day. But as I drifted off, somewhere between dreaming and waking, I felt it again, that cold, paralyzing grip holding me down. My eyes snapped open, but my body refused to move. I was trapped, just like before. This time, though, the room felt different. The air was thicker, heavier, almost suffocating. I could feel a presence, not just at the foot of my bed, but closer, near the closet. My gaze, sluggish and strained, flickered towards the dark corner where the closet door stood slightly ajar. The shadows inside seemed to swirl, shifting slowly as if alive. Then I sensed it, a cold breath on my face, soft and chilling, like the exhale of something not human. My skin prickled with a mix of fear and disbelief. The presence was crawling closer, inch by agonizing inch. I wanted to scream, to move, to do anything to break free, but the paralysis held me tight, a merciless cage. The shadow near the closet grew darker, more defined, but still impossible to fully see. It didn't have a clear shape, more like a void, an absence of light that absorbed whatever it touched. I could almost hear a faint breathing, slow and deliberate, right beside me. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as if warning me to stay still, to not provoke whatever lurked there. I closed my eyes, hoping to escape the terror by forcing myself back into sleep, but the moment only stretched longer. The sensation of cold breath lingered, sending shivers down my spine. Then, as if sensing my fear, the presence seemed to press harder against the room, the darkness expanding, swallowing the edges of the bed. I tried to focus on a single thought, a single image, anything to anchor me. But the panic was overwhelming, a tidal wave of dread that threatened to drown me. I felt as if I was balancing on the edge of two worlds, one awake, one trapped in nightmare. The closet door creaked open a little more, and the darkness spilled out like ink across the floor. Suddenly, the cold breath vanished, and the paralysis began to loosen its grip. My fingers twitched, then my toes, and finally, with a gasp, I sat upright, my body trembling. The room was silent again, the closet door shut tight as if nothing had happened. But the fear didn't fade. It clung to me, a shadow etched deep inside my mind. That night marked a shift. I wasn't just facing sleep paralysis anymore, I was facing an entity, something malevolent that seemed drawn to my vulnerability. The feeling of cold breath, the creeping darkness near the closet, it wasn't just a hallucination. It was a presence that haunted the edges of my consciousness, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just my mind filling the silence and shadows with fear, a trick of exhaustion and stress. But the sensation was too vivid, too real to ignore. I began to dread bedtime, the place where safety should be. My room, once a sanctuary, became a stage for these nightly terrors. I shared this new experience with a close friend, hoping for comfort or advice. She listened, her eyes wide but calm. She told me she'd had similar episodes, paralysis accompanied by a looming shadow, a presence that felt alive and threatening. We exchanged stories, finding a strange solidarity in our shared fear. Determined to fight back, I researched ways to cope. Some suggested keeping a night light on, others recommended focusing on small movements to break paralysis faster. I tried everything, deep breathing, muscle twitches, even repeating a mantra in my head. But the fear was relentless, and the presence near the closet remained a haunting memory. One night, after a particularly intense episode, I sat awake for hours, staring at the closet door. It was closed, but in my mind's eye, I could still feel the darkness lurking just behind it. The silence was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing. I wondered if this entity was drawn to me specifically, feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each encounter. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes. Shadows in my peripheral vision seemed darker, the silence in the room heavier. I questioned my own sanity, wondering if I was losing grip on reality. Was this all just a manifestation of anxiety, or something more sinister? The line blurred further, and I found myself avoiding sleep, fearing the paralysis and the shadow that came with it. The presence near the closet wasn't just a hallucination anymore, it was a symbol of my deepest fears, a reminder that some nightmares don't end when you wake up. And even though I desperately wanted to believe it was all in my head, a part of me knew that whatever haunted me waited patiently in the darkness, ready to return. Music fades out. Soft, eerie music begins, the episodes of sleep paralysis kept coming, each one more vivid and disturbing than the last. But nothing prepared me for the night when the hallucinations took on a terrifying new form, distorted faces of people I loved, twisted and grotesque, staring down at me with expressions that chilled me to the bone. It was during a period of intense emotional turmoil. I'd just gone through a painful breakup, and everything felt fragile and raw. That night, I slipped into sleep with a heart heavy with sadness and anxiety. When I woke, and I use the word loosely, I was frozen again, unable to move or cry out. But this time, the room was filled with faces. Familiar faces, but twisted into something nightmarish. My mother's face was the first I saw. At first, she looked calm, but then her features began to warp, her eyes stretched unnaturally wide, her mouth twisting into a silent scream. Next was my father's face, pale and gaunt, his smile stretched into a grotesque grin that didn't reach his eyes. Friends from high school appeared, their faces melting and reforming into unrecognizable masks of fear and anger. They hovered just above me, their eyes locked onto mine, unblinking and accusing. The fear wasn't just because they looked wrong. It was the sense that these faces were trying to warn me, to tell me something I couldn't understand. Their expressions seemed to carry messages I instinctively knew were important, but the paralysis kept me from responding or moving closer. I felt trapped, not just physically but emotionally, caught in a nightmare where the people I loved were somehow twisted into omens of dread. The hallucinations weren't static. They moved and shifted with an unnatural fluidity, melting into one another before reforming into new, equally disturbing shapes. The room itself felt like it was warping around me, the walls bending and the ceiling stretching into darkness. The sensation was overwhelming, a crushing mix of sadness, fear, and helplessness. In that moment, I wondered if sleep paralysis was more than just a glitch in the brain's wiring. Was it possible that these visions were tapping into something deeper, my subconscious fears, my guilt, my pain? Or worse, was it some kind of warning, a glimpse into events yet to come? The idea terrified me. After what felt like an eternity, the faces began to fade, melting back into shadows. Movement returned to my body, and I gasped for air, my chest heaving. But the images stayed with me, etched into my mind like a dark prophecy. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I spoke about this experience to a therapist, hoping to find some explanation. She suggested that my emotional state was manifesting in these hallucinations, that sleep paralysis can amplify our deepest fears and anxieties. It made sense, but it didn't make it less terrifying. If anything, it made me question what else my mind could conjure when left unchecked. I began to keep a dream journal, trying to record every detail of these episodes. The distorted faces appeared again and again, each time tied to moments of heightened stress or emotional pain. It was as if my mind was warning me, trying to communicate through the veil of paralysis. Friends and family noticed that I was becoming withdrawn, haunted by these visions. They told me to relax, to seek help, to focus on self-care. But the fear lingered, an ever-present shadow. I wondered if sleep paralysis was a symptom or a cause, was it feeding my fears, or was it a doorway to something darker? One particularly vivid episode left me shaken for days. I woke up paralyzed, and the faces appeared once more, this time clearer, almost lifelike. My mother's face softened briefly, her eyes filled with sorrow, as if begging me to pay attention. Then the scene shifted, and I saw a glimpse of myself, alone and desperate, trapped in a dark room with no escape. When I finally moved, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The visions were gone, but their message lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that sleep paralysis was more than just an isolated event, it was a mirror reflecting my fears, a warning I couldn't ignore. I found myself asking difficult questions. Could sleep paralysis predict real-life dangers? Could these hallucinations be more than just dreams? Was there a deeper connection between my emotional turmoil and the terrifying images that haunted me? As these questions swirled in my mind, I realized I was living in a constant state of alertness, always bracing for the next episode. Sleep, once a refuge, had become a battleground where my mind waged war against itself. Music fades softly. Ominous music begins softly. That night, I came home later than usual, exhausted and worn from a long day that seemed to stretch endlessly. I was desperate to close my eyes and escape into sleep, hoping for some relief from the constant dread that had been shadowing me. But as soon as I lay down, the familiar paralysis returned, this time with an intensity one hadn't experienced before. My body was frozen instantly, breath shallow, heart pounding in a frantic rhythm. It felt as if the darkness itself was pressing down on me, suffocating, relentless. But what truly shattered my peace was what I saw when I opened my eyes. Standing over me was a malevolent entity, cloaked in shadows so thick they seemed to swallow the dim light of the room. Its shape was vaguely humanoid but twisted, elongated, and distorted, like a nightmare-given form. I couldn't make out a face, but I felt its gaze piercing right through me, cold and merciless. The room was filled with eerie whispers, barely audible at first, like voices speaking in a language just beyond comprehension. They grew louder, swirling around me, wrapping me in a suffocating embrace of sound and darkness. I tried to scream, to move, anything, but my voice was stolen, my limbs locked in place. The entity slowly reached out, its hand gliding through the air, inches from my face. The whispers intensified, their words turning into a sickening laughter that echoed in my mind. It was as if the darkness itself was mocking me, feeding off my helplessness. Time lost all meaning. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell, passed in that frozen nightmare. The entity's presence was overwhelming, a void of despair and terror. I was utterly powerless, trapped in a waking nightmare with no escape. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the entity vanished. The whispers faded into silence, the room brightened slightly, and I could move again. I bolted upright, heart racing, sweat pouring down my face. But the terror didn't leave me. It clung to my skin, a cold reminder that the darkness still watched. I told my friends and family about the experience, hoping for understanding or reassurance. They listened, some skeptical, others concerned. They told me it was just sleep paralysis, a harmless, and albeit frightening, sleep disorder. But I knew better. This was something different. Something darker. Even now, the memory of that night haunts me. The malevolent presence, the suffocating whispers, the laughter that chilled me to the bone, they remain vivid in my mind, a scar etched deep within. I try to convince myself that it's just my brain playing tricks, that the darkness isn't real. But every time I close my eyes, I wonder if it's waiting to return. Sleep paralysis has become more than a terrifying ordeal. It's a constant shadow in my life, a reminder of the fragile boundary between dreams and reality, between the waking world and the nightmares that lurk just beyond perception. And though friends and family assure me it's nothing more than a harmless phenomenon, I remain wary, because the darkness that visits me in those paralyzed moments feels all too real, and it never truly leaves. Music fades out. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.